War is certainly not the focus of Crusader Kings 3, however, it is still an integral part of it, and it is something many will be buying this game to participate in. War is something that in my beginner's guide, I did not touch too much into because it's actually very simple, but today I wanted to give it a proper detailed look and explain to you how war works, how to fight it, how to get better at it, how it works. So to start with, let's start from the very, very basics. War begins in the military screen here, or sort of, anyway. A lot of what you need from war is here. Your armies that you have direct access to, mercenaries that you can hire. If you do choose to hire mercenaries, they are a pay one fee and then get access to them for a couple years type of thing. And holy orders, which are tied to religions and used only, well, they're only usable when fighting different religions. Early in the game, there will be no holy orders, but you can found your own, as you can see here, if you meet certain conditions, and you can hire them from others as well, but you can only make one by yourself. For most wars, especially early on, you will be relying on your levies, your knights, your men-at-arms, and if you're playing someone like Hastings at the beginning, some special soldiers. And what you have available to you for waging war will vary incredibly depending on what DLCs you pay for. Levies are your average Joe, your average farmer, just pulled up in a time of war. They're pulled from little baronies like these castles, these cities, or church holdings, depending, to fight in your wars. Champions, these knights, these are characters in your court that can be recruited for money or are already present in some way, such as a vassal. They can be allowed, forced to be knights, or even forbidden in case you don't want them. There are ways to acquire more, like inviting them. If you play a small nation, you may not have access to a lot all at once, but these guys are like superheroes. These are not just knights. These are not just champions. They can single-handedly take on hordes of enemies all by themselves, but they will usually be fighting others of their stature, other champions. Men-at-arms are miniature superheroes. They're like levies on methamphetamines. No, they're like levies that were born with methamphetamines coursing through their bodies. These guys are so absolutely insane that if you had 1,000 of them, which right now I have 500, just say right here, they could take on thousands of levies. Personally, I've had armies of 5,000 men-at-arms defeat armies of 20,000 plus mixture of levies and men-at-arms. That's how overpowered these guys are, especially if you use them well. And then, depending, you might have access to some special soldiers as well. These are usually attached to a character, and they will die permanently when they do die. No way to get them back, and when the character dies, then you lose them permanently as well. This is Count Hastings' house. It's just 1,500 units, 1,200 levies, 300 huscarls. Those are a type of men-at-arms. He has 2 of them. They're pretty good. You can always create new men-at-arms if you have slots for that. This is determined by your rank, your culture traditions, and we'll get into that. The men-at-arms you can recruit are based on your culture and DLC availability. They are all good at different things. Huscarls and armored footmen are examples of heavy infantry, and heavy infantry have their own counters. You see armored footmen counter spearmen, huscarls also counter archers. Especially if you have DLCs, you will find that the Norse units generally have more counters, more effects, and more buffs and stats than any other unit in the game. I am assuming it is because Paradox is Swedish, and thus they just shamelessly wanted to make their units the best. They did an amazing job at it, especially if you play their DLC. You will have an entire array of units here that are all Norse and that are all just better than anything else that you will find. You'll have your equivalents of, say, bowmen, pikemen, and these other units. But base, if you are DLC-less and not Norse, armored footmen will be countering spearmen. Pikemen are a form of spearmen. They are countering mostly different kinds of cavalry, as you see. They get bonuses in more defensible locations. Bowmen will be countering skirmishers. That is specifically referring to, say, light footmen right here. Lightly armored and mostly harassing units. And then, of course, there's light horsemen and even heavier forms of horsemen. For example, if you're Orthodox, especially Byzantine, you'll get access to cataphracts, which are some pretty devastating heavy cavalry. You have the different statistics here from damage dealt, toughness, so the damage you can withstand, pursuit for chasing down and killing some enemies, and screen. Every one of these is the opposite of the other, in case you ever get confused. Toughness is how you withstand damage, and screen is how you withstand pursuit. Pursuit is how you kill enemies permanently, especially after you win, and screen is how you stop your units from being killed after the battle is over. And then levies, as you can see by their stats, they just suck against literally everything, so don't expect too much from them. Men-at-arms can be stationed for bonuses. For example, I could take these armored footmen, station them. I only have Montague available, but if I station them, we will gain exactly these stats here, and this is determined by the buildings that are located here, which as of right now is not a lot. To summon your troops, you're going to need a rally point. You can add any rally point to any bit of territory in your kingdom, empire, duchy, even if you do not directly own it. This will immediately, generally, there might be some raising time, but in this case there is none, teleport any and every unit that you choose to raise here. Depending on your culture and government type, you might have access to raiding as well. The difference between raising armies and raising raiders is that armies are only going to be able to go and actually conquer things in a war, and then raiders are going to be able to go and earn money. They do this by going to, say, this city right here, which has a loot of 9. They would go take that 9 from there, and this would open up hostilities with the opponent. They could even siege down a barony to claim, say, this 23 loot inside, this 9 loot. Basically, if you're a more tribal culture, then you can actually use war to make money instead of just to acquire titles. Now with raiding, that's pretty simple. You just raise raiders and then you go in, and then when you hit the hex, it will just work. To declare war, you need to first actually right-click on whoever your target is. For an example, in this case, the Kingdom of Brittany, declare war, which we have a couple of war justifications against. You might not have any war justifications against whoever you want to fight, in which case you might need to get some. The simplest and potentially least effective way is to go to your council, find whoever is in your learning slot here, and fabricate a claim on the county. If you have access to, say, the Pope or some equivalent, you can always bribe him through interactions. Everything in this game is done by right-clicking to actually purchase a claim on somebody. You can also get claims through familial relations. For example, the Kingdom of Brittany right here, this is the line of succession. And so if I select a random person down the line of succession, I can see that he has these different claims. There is a difference between pressed and unpressed claims. Pressed claims are like really good ones, like I'm fourth in line to inherit. And an unpressed claim is like, I magically found these papers that say that I'm in line to inherit, basically. Unpressed claims will generally go away once you die and not really be passed on. Pressed claims do have a capacity to be pressed on, and they are easier and less costly to push in a variety of ways. Let me show you an example of raiding to start. So I'm going to raise all raiders. They're going to go to my rally point. They are now raising. I have to unpause to actually get them raising. I don't know why this came all the way out here, but it did. These are all my raiders. It does not include my special soldiers. They do not raise by default as raiders, but they have risen, and then I can unpause, send them over into Brittany, the city of Rice. If we speed this up, you see the bar shows them going. Once it grays out, you can no longer turn around. You can no longer get out. You see, the Kingdom of Brittany did not like me raiding. However, I am here and I am raiding. This is the process of raiding. It's going to take about a month to raid this spot for the 9 gold that is within it. This army is going to try to stop me. They're going to try to fight me. AI will defend themselves like this. However, as an example, if your stuff gets raided, your AI will not lift a finger to defend itself. It will expect you to do it. The burden always falls onto the highest person. In war and raiding, anybody underneath does absolutely nothing to help those above. The way it's calculated instead is, say you have vassals as the Kingdom of Brittany. You have, for example, the County of Remos here. The County of Remos is providing a certain amount of money and levies to his overlord, and now the overlord is expected to do everything. This is your army UI when you do have an army selected, by the way. There's a couple things to note here that we can go over. We have a nice array of things we can see. So, this is your amount of troops, 722. You can see the specifics of what troops you have. These are always levies, these are always knights, and different men-at-arms will be lined up with their relevant symbols over here. You can see your attrition. This is the percentage of your army that will die every single month, and it will show you why. This could be due to supply and other things. If I have my unit selected and I hover over a location, like the city of Rye here, I can see the supply limit is 3,437. If I go over that, it will lead to some problems with attrition, and we wouldn't really be able to easily sustain our food here either. This is our food, by the way. These are our supplies. If they go down enough, we will start attriting due to lack of food. Additionally, the lower it gets, we will start getting debuffs in combat about not having enough food. Our men will be hungry, starving, they won't fight as well. This will just indicate that you are raiding. For example, we're looking at a raiding party. You can see that this is commanded by the ruler. It specifically states that this is commanded by the ruler, because that is kind of important information to know. You can select a new commander and swap it out with anybody else that you have, including one of your knights, one of your vassals, if you have any. It'll show you the quality, and it'll show you stars. 1 star is very poor, 2 stars is decent, 3, or I think there might be 4, are much better. This is a whole average of the units that are in your group. It is decent quality because there's a healthy mixture of levies and men-at-arms in here. If I brought out something that was basically entirely men-at-arms, it might be 3 stars instead. If I brought out something that was mostly levies, it might be 1 star instead. This is just a gauge. It's just a rating of power. It's not like a 1-star army is always going to be terrible. You need to look at what is inside of it. This is just a new player friendly way to show what this army can do. If it's at 2 stars, then it should theoretically be able to handle anything around its own number size, depending on other bonuses. If it's at 3 stars, you could probably fight armies way larger than it. If it's at 1 stars, you might need to outnumber your enemy quite dramatically. You can also see your advantage level and what it contributes to it. So my commander's martial skill, for example, which is this right here. He starts with 30, which is incredible. These are one of the character stats that I go over in the beginner's guide that I made. This contributes greatly to commanding an army. He also gets a +5 just by leading his own soldiers, and then there are more traits and such you can get here that can give you specific bonuses as well to leading your soldiers. Right here is raid loot. Once you fill up on loot, you'll have to go back to friendly territory to actually drop your loot off. There are other buttons down here as well, such as attach to army. So you can get smaller armies, such as mercenaries or other holdings. If there were other, say, vassals, for example, you could attach your army to them, or mercenaries to your own army, for example, and then they would follow them around as you gave them the orders to right-click and move around the map. You can split off a new army, and then it would give you options on how to detach. You could split the army roughly in half, to the best the game can figure out how to split it in half. You could split off hired and special soldiers. So, for example, we looked at these special soldiers and mercenaries. It would split them off from a bigger army that you might have combined them into. This game lets you combine basically anyone into anything. The only downside is you might lose certain bonuses, like leading own soldiers, for example. And you can immediately stop being a raiding army if you are a raiding army. You could disband an army entirely. Additionally, you can disband all from this menu here, the military menu. And if you're done with a war or raiding, then right down here, there'll be a pop-up letting you know that you can disband as well. Now, looking at actual warfare, not raiding, I've gone back. We're going to declare war. Now, there's different kinds of casus belli that you can use. These are more standard tribalistic ones where you just conquer a county, a duchy, or a kingdom. To give you an idea, these are duchy titles. Every one of these little areas are counties, and these here are kingdoms. The higher up it is, the more terrifying of a cost it will have, and more restrictions. In this case, I need a level of fame to do something like that. There's also a religious variant of this where you go after those of a different religion, where you can use piety instead. I could conquer the Duchy of Brittany, which would let me conquer all of this, or just go for a single county. As you see, the costs to declare war are currently in prestige, but as I mentioned, they can also be in piety. So it'll also show the result of a war. If I enforce my demands, because there's only 3 possible endings to every war, at least as a full resolution, enforcing your demands, which will give you some amount of resources, as well as give you this title. There's make a white peace, which since I attacked would have negative repercussions on my prestige, positive on the defender, and because I am ambitious, it would even grant me stress. And then surrender, where I would have to pay money. He could not take anything from me. This game does not have that kind of diplomatic freedom. I could then declare war, and you see, we are now at war. If I had allies, I would be prompted to call them in, but I do not have any allies. I can raise all armies, and it will do that. If I control click, then it won't spread them out based on supply limits. So I'm going to control click because I don't know if they can even all raise at once. Yeah, they can. They actually can. I am in charge of my army. This is sometimes a smart idea, sometimes not. If I was to do, say, a naval invasion over here, I would right-click out to sea, and you see, we would just sort of get the boats to spawn in magically, and they have a cost. You can see the original cost is 37.2 for that army, but there is a modification to it, minus 75% just for being the Norse culture. As I mentioned, the Norse are kind of fucking OP. You see the buttons down here have slightly changed now that we are in normal army form, by the way. It no longer shows any loot that we must carry back home. However, you can still get money by taking things over. You can turn into a raiding party if you're already summoned. But since we have these special units, it is just 100% not an option. When you do have a stack like this, you must individually give them orders. There is no way to automate them, such as an Imperator Rome. It is specific to every individual stack, so this can get a little micromanagey, and that's why attaching to army can be useful if you're trying to send them all in different directions. Otherwise, you might want to practice a healthy dose of pausing and unpausing, potentially at slower speeds as well. You can always see the predicted arrival to a location. It does update in real time as you are traveling. There's also this to note, this ford right here. Be very careful of rivers, because as you cross into enemy territory, then bad things can start to happen. You may notice I did not stop in the city this time. That's because we cannot besiege a city to own things. Counties are generally controlled by whatever barony is the castle barony. Not always. There are some government types that this won't affect, such as a republic, but as of right now, you can't play a republic anyway, so you don't have to worry about this too much. But a castle barony, with like you can see right here, it looks like just a little fort. This is what you'll have to besiege down, potentially assault, to control the entire county around it. If there are multiple baronies that are castles, then you will have to besiege multiples of them. Since we do have our special troops, we have a little bit of an advantage here. This barony only has a fort level of 2. If this had a fort level of, I believe, over 4, we would actually really desperately want a men-at-arms that was siege equipment. But as of right now, our culture does not have access for us to recruit this sort of thing. If we look at the Norse culture right here, if you look in the innovations, you can see, this is all the technologies. You can see the ones that will determine what you can have as men-at-arms and other things like this. For example, the onager here is not researched. This is the earliest level of siege equipment that we can get, and until it is researched by the culture head or by natural spreading based on certain circumstances that I described in the beginner's guide, it has more to do with ruling your nation than military, really, then we would eventually get access to onagers that we could then put in to make sieging go faster, or to extremely make it go faster if we are besieging a very fortified location. You could see a time prediction of when the siege will end, when it will be won. Maximum 7 months from now. It says maximum because the daily siege progress can change, and every 20 days there are random events that will affect it. For example, now it's getting better because now there's starvation. Supplies of the enemies are running low, which is a one-time increase of siege progress by 5%. You can also assault the fort if there are holes in the walls, for example. And oh, look at this, enemy ally joins the war. So the Kingdom of West Franconia has joined the war. As you can see, you can kind of join a war in the middle basically whenever, so long as you have allies. It just so happens that Brittany was allied to Francia. You can actually see this information. For example, oh, here's an army sailing by in case you wanted to know what that looks like. But you can see this. You can see right here, Brittany has an alliance to King Charles II, the Bald of West Francia. That is an alliance with a character, by the way. That is not an alliance with the nation. So if this character were to be replaced by somebody else, then the alliance would no longer stand. And it'll even show you how the alliance was created, in this case, through marriage. There are limited ways to make alliances yourself, such as by marrying a close family member to a close family member of another character, or just, directly to that character. There is also, if we look at the lifestyles, there's these different lifestyles you can pick, such as diplomacy, which can allow you defensive negotiations. This will allow one alliance without a marriage. You are very restricted in how you achieve alliances regardless. Alliances that go outside your realm will allow them to come and help in a war. Alliances within your realm will stop them from joining factions and rebelling against you. As you can see, our siege is going quite well though. Even with minimal siege equipment to assist, our enemies are too worried to actually try to stop us. And if we look at the war right here, we can now see updated. Blue is us, red is the enemies. Depending on when you join in a war, this may not be as helpful, these colors, but you can see the war score as well. You can see kind of who started it and what the war is over, and the total forces on every side. You see, we are now technically outnumbered. So if they all got together to attack us all at once, we could potentially run into some problems. There have been 2 more events: sickness spreading, which adds more daily siege progress. Sickness spreading, you see it right here under the daily progress. And now we even have desertion, another one-time bonus to our siege progress. And as you see here, we are very, very close to taking. And the game thinks I need to learn what war score is for some reason. Regardless, we don't need to, because I'm currently the one teaching how this... Excuse me! This is my guide! Okay, fine. The game wants to teach you instead of me. So we have 100% war score, and there is a reason for this. The reason is not actually the fact that we took the war target. It's that while taking the war target, we actually took the war leader who was living here in the capital. We captured him, which is an immediate 100% war score. Heirs can be worth a good bit of war score as well, but this is a huge stroke of luck considering that the war has pretty much turned against us. If I enforce my demands, we'll go ahead and enforce, and shut up game, I'm teaching. So be it. We have now conquered the county of Nantes. I now own it, and it has been added into my domain. Now that the war is over, I can disband my armies down here, as I told you was an option. These guys are going to be a little confused for a second as they try to come through my territory. Not realizing the war is over, they were already committed to their moves. They have disbanded, as you see them phasing off into the distance now as well. When you are at war, you are capable of moving through neutral territory in addition to actually sailing around. The game doesn't make that big a deal of you trespassing for some reason. So if I wished to go to war with Lyon over here, I could either sail there or run directly through Brittany. It's just that resupplying would be pretty difficult. If I ever ran out of food, by the way, I would want to just come back to friendly territory. Ideally, enemy territory can work, just as long as I have enough supply to actually refill the food of my units to keep those stats high. Those are, however, the basics of war, and it will be up to you to weave them into other parts of this game, such as ruling entire duchies, kingdoms, and empires, using war to keep them together. As I mentioned, war is not the focus of Crusader Kings 3, but it is still an integral part of it. So whether you choose to expand via political marriage or by gruesome conquest, you at least now know the basics of how to defend yourself and how potentially to take from others. So I hope this guide has been helpful to you. For now, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope to see you on another guide, which by the way, there's more of in the playlist in the description below.